Good morning and welcome. This is Sunrise Daily. I'm Ayo Makile.
Well, it's 7 a.m. right here in Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital, now 7:01 a.m. Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Kayode Okikyolu.
How does that sound like radio in my ears?
Time is money.
Well, when we see it like this, you know we have papers guest with us, someone to help us go through the papers with us this morning. Abimbola Tukis, editor of Business World. Thanks for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with the leadership newspaper this morning. And of course, as would be expected, that declaration by the Vice President is making the news. The leadership newspaper begins session this morning, and it leads with 2023 presidential ambition. APC governors quotes between Osinbajo, Tinubu, stories on page 4.
That'll be declaration, right? The presidential declaration.
What did I say?
Ambition.
Oh, Jesus.
Do you have an ambition?
2023 presidential ambition. Yeah, I go again. Presidential declaration. APC governors quote between Osinbajo and Tinubu, stories on page 4. We will pick the best candidate ascribed to governors. Tinubu disowns Osinbajo as political godson. Anyway, excitement in states over VP's declaration. 2023 elections may not hold if insecurity persists. That's according to CAN. That lead story is still making the news. Is it something that editors enjoy casting the headlines for, especially when it's a story that you've been kind of expecting?
Of course, this is one of the moments that editors enjoy because, you know, news keep coming in, especially when it is political and it is national. Of course, all of us expect that this kind of moment will come. We also expected that the Vice President will declare, and we know that just a matter of time when this declaration will come. And now with this declaration now, we can safely say that the real politics has begun. So it's a good moment for the editors, and we have to savor it. The hope that another challenge is for us to be able to analyze very well and critically, to be able to even help the electorate to decide on what is good for the country. I think these are part of the job that the editors will saddled with at this moment.
So the conversation about son or not, political son or otherwise, I mean, what's the propriety of that in all of this conversation, especially when you talk about helping the electorate focus on the issues at hand? How important is this son, father, or whatever relationship?
I don't know where that coinage is coming from. Maybe it's peculiar to Nigerian politics, because I don't know whether I've had it in any other part of the world. Political son, you know. I think it comes from the godfatherism nature of Nigerian politics that we play. But be that as it may, Jagaban himself said he doesn't have any son that is old enough to make such declarations. So I think it's just Nigerian coinage, and I don't see the relevance in what we are talking about here.
But that's the leadership newspaper today.
Well, let's turn our attention to Vanguard. Vanguard newspaper has, leads with a side to that story on the front page of the leadership, and it concerns elections and security, or do I say insecurity? And this is what you have. 2023, there may be no elections if, that's according to Khan, Sultan, Ohaneze, Nef, others, want FG to expose those financing terrorism in Nigeria, ask government to ensure terrorists pay for their crimes. Note, banditry can only be addressed through social justice and not military action. So it's a page 9 read, and you see how big a role security plays in anything, not just the economy, even elections as well. So is this one of the issues we need to be focusing on right now, the questions we need to be asking those throwing their hats into the ring as well?
There's no doubt about that. This is what has been staring us in the face in the past few years. And now that we are going into the election year, it becomes much more, very, very important for us to actually think about it, take a critical look at it, and see how this situation can be nipped in the bud. Of course, when you know there's no security, how will people go out to vote? Threat to life. You know that even prior the election day, a lot of people travel to their homes, to their states, to their villages to vote. How would that happen if people are not sure whether they will get to their destination? So it is a lot of problem that this government needs to look at critically, because security, election is also about security of lives. If you are not sure that you will even go and vote and come back home safely, why will you go in the first place? So these are issues that should bother us as a nation, and also as government. One of the past head of state said, in times of security crisis, if the government cannot nip it in the bud within a certain period, then the people in government must have hand in it. I don't know. He's one of the generals that has also ruled this country. So if somebody like that could be saying, I mean, it's so worrisome. It's something that we should, Nigerians should stand up to and wake up our sleeping government to say, this, we are going to the election year. Measures need to be put in place to ensure that people are secured to elect the new government.
And you know, the tricky thing about this general election is it's not one of the off-cycle elections when you can pool security from different states and just, you know, concentrate them on a particular state. Now, this one, every man for himself, as it were. So, and they've also said that even with insecurity in some areas, you still have elections holding. So is this maybe, I don't know, different sides to this, a ploy to reduce voter turnout? Because you've referenced some sort of complicity or sabotage even within government, and a lot of people have talked about that. So may this be that on the one hand, or, I mean, just something we've gotten used to? We'll still do elections in any case, even though insecurity persists.
Yes, of course, we'll do election, given any circumstance. One of the effects is that there may be low turnout. There has always been low turnout anyway. Yeah. In any given election, you see turnout at 30%, at even less than 30% in some instances. So this will not be an exception, because you know that many people go from one state to the other also to vote. So that will also be affected. People will not, there won't be free movement from one state to the other. That will also contribute to the low turnout. Even general apathy, that if I go, I don't know if I will come back. That is also a contributory factor. So all this put together, I don't think will give us a very good election unless something drastic is done to the prevailing situation. That is when one can now be sure that at least there will be relatively. But going by what is happening at the moment, I'm afraid the turnout this time around might be even lower than what we have experienced in the past. You
know, the irony is the APC says they have 40 million registered members. So you'd expect that at least turnout for APC alone should be close. But you know what? Let's dive deeper into that. We have almost a year or less to talk about that. A couple of other stories. That sad word, Osinachi, why we arrested husband. That's from FCT Police. That's about the gospel artist Osinachi, who died over the weekend. And you see untold story of how popular gospel singer died, pages 6 and 7. But there's another crisis brewing in Lagos, just to mention this. NURTW crisis. 3 dead, many injured as Oluomo's men take over motor parks in Lagos. This is where we are right now. And that's Lagos, by the way.
Honestly, it doesn't speak well of Lagos state government. This is supposed to have been nipped in the bud very early enough. The Oluomo phenomenon is becoming so unnecessary and given undue publicity,
or maybe enigmatic
and encouragement. You know, I expect Lagos state government to actually do better than what it is doing. We know that since Oluomo's comfort area has been dealt with, there's no way you will expect it to go unchallenged. So I expect the state government to have actually rise up to the occasion and ensure that this kind of problem doesn't even arise in the first place.
Well, let's try to brighten your morning with Mr. and Mrs. just before we move on to the next paper. So you see Mrs. telling Mr., I think she's on her way out, she has her handbag, saying, if we're going to be judged by our faithfulness to our partners, most men will be in hell. And Mr., I don't know if he's guilty though, says, and where will their mistresses be? Oh. Annex maybe, hell annex.
Okay, there's annex in hell. I see.
That's a Vanguard newspaper this morning.
Oh, dear God. Well, the Daily Trust newspaper this morning is also talking politics. Southwest weighs options on Tinubu Osinbajo. Governors divided as Afenifere keeps mum. Why I want to succeed Buhari, scribed to Osinbajo. I have no son grown enough to vie for presidency, scribed to Tinubu. Find the details on the inside pages. But below the pictures you see there, of course, that other issue raised by religious leaders is also right above the main story. Insecurity, there may be no Nigeria in 2023. That's ascribed to the Sultan. Under the picture, 4 people dead, over 40 boats burnt in Port Harcourt jetty fire incident. Oil thieves fingered, Wike orders probe. I don't know. It was sometimes when I see these stories, I just feel, is something degrading our humanity?
Well, it's something that we should all ponder and be worried about. Is just, I don't know how to describe it, but it is, yes, of course, when we talk about humanity, this is something that calls for concern, and everybody actually needs to be concerned about it. And one expects that the appropriate quarters will take actions to ensure that some of these things don't actually
Well, that's
occur.
Thank you. That's the Daily Trust newspaper today.
Well, it's a sad one on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune. Just trying to grapple with these, this story. You see, terrorists kill over 80, abduct 70, burn several houses in Plateau. Government, or I think governor, condemns attack. Victims given mass burial. It's a page 26 read, and I think this just ties to the question he asked. And this is something we have been seeing for quite some time now, and that points to the very present challenge of insecurity. Terrorists kill over 80, abduct 7, burn several houses in Plateau.
Abduct 70.
70 rather.
Put it just succinctly, the government has lost it. They have lost control of almost everything as far as security is concerned. It's like there's no idea again. Everything is just in disarray. And that is why many Nigerians cannot just wait for May next year to come. Maybe there will be fresh blood in governance. It is pathetic, it is sad that even after 7 years, we are still where we are today. There's no doubting the fact that this government has failed Nigerians as far as security is concerned. Look at this sad news. This one happened yesterday. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. We don't know what will happen day after tomorrow. And it's a daily occurrence like that. So how long are we going to live with this? It's just...
we have agencies, we have people saddled with that responsibility. Is it intelligence gathering? Is it securing those areas? Is it maintaining law and order? Is it prosecution of maybe those arrested? I remember that question was asked at that meeting where security and elections were raised. How many people have been prosecuted? Who are the people behind these things? And it looks like those questions are just left unanswered.
Yeah, that's even if that is a rumor before, now one is compelled to believe that something I mean, there is the third hand and third leg in all this. If this thing cannot be dealt with at this moment, that means somebody is there that is above the law. There are some people hiding in some places that are actually fueling this, and they are so powerful that they can't be touched. And that is quite unfortunate. That is quite unfortunate.
We'll see what the government has to say about this, and more importantly, has to do about this one.
What have they said other than to set up committees to look into cases, the committees that will never hear any good?
This is really sad.
Sad.
There's also the
Very
story from ASU. ASU meets with FG, says no resumption until demands are met. So this started on February the 14th, ASU strike. You know what? I'll just leave it there for the Nigerian Tribune.
Questions around that really. So many questions around that. Let's take a look at the Guardian newspaper this morning. And what you have is still talking politics. Showdown in Southwest as Osinbajo Tinubu eye APC ticket. Quite a load of riders to that story. I'll allow you to do the picking yourself. And right under that picture and beside one of the right under the story, beside one of the pictures you see there, why Osinbajo's declaration spurred rallies nationwide by supporters. Find the story on page 3 of the Guardian newspaper this morning, and a few others you will find interesting.
Well, let's take a trip to the nation's capital, Abuja, and give you what's on the front page of the Abuja Inquirer. That's right, and this is what you find. 24 years after, FCTA upgrades traffic lights with 394 million naira. You see banditry, kidnapping. Bello summons emergency meeting. Page 3.
I'm going to ask a question around that. Okay.
I'm not sure why I'm laughing, because it is
Answer the question that I want to ask that I've not asked. Because I remember there was a time where we heard that all these things had been installed, were not working, and there was supposed to be some kind of committee to.
Okay, that's a
find out.
CCTV.
How does that differ from this?
Well, so the traffic, exactly why I'm laughing, really. So we have the CCTVs, now traffic lights, and I think you should go on with your question, really.
Was there any latest, anything more recent about that committee that was supposed to do something? Because I thought CCTV was part of the whole security apparatus.
Well, simply put, in a government that has no idea, frivolities are celebrated. Because we are celebrating installation of street lights.
Upgrades.
We see upgrade of street lights. So that is to tell
Traffic lights, pardon me.
Traffic lights.
Yes,
well,
traffic lights.
I don't know if that is what celebrating common traffic lights. It tells you the composition of the kind of people we have in government. Street lights is something that should be given, that should be everywhere. Okay, I was listening to this man that was released in Cotonou the other day. So when you get to Cotonou, street light, in fact, you feel like sleeping on the road, because you may not even put on your headlights if you are driving on the Cotonou road. That is Cotonou there. And we are giant of Africa. So it's quite unfortunate.
And I think this touches not just on it's important to read that story to get the context, but not just for the FCT, which has its own governance structure, different from what you have in states or the federal government. But it's also important to look across states. Some of these things that we should take for granted, traffic lights, street lights,
yes.
I mean, waste disposal baskets. I mean, just simple things that you wonder, this is not rocket science, but hey, and it's good for the FCT, I guess.
Gratifying, even though it's 24 years after, but
24 years after.
I mean, it's on the front page. I didn't say it.
Yeah.
But, it's not like we didn't have these things before. Is it a government thing or a people thing as well?
Well, I think it's both, because even the populace itself has a culture of, damaged culture. You know, it's a public thing. It should be used carelessly. I think that's also part of the problem. It's one thing for the government to provide what the public need. It's another thing for the public to be able to guard it jealously to ensure that it's useful for the use of everybody. But in a situation whereby attitude of, well, this government thing, it can be used anyhow, I think that culture should change. While we are demanding more from government, if they're able to do all these little things, I think we should also rise to the challenge of ensuring that those properties are well maintained and kept for the use of everybody.
Okay. Well, it was UNICEF is adding its voice just to mention to the whole educational crisis we're facing, saying Nigeria facing worse educational crisis. So yet another reason why we need to reopen our schools and universities and ensure we do right by our children. That's the Abuja Inquirer.
And this morning, you'll also look at the front page of the Nigerian News Direct. It's Talking Politics, 2023 presidential race. Osinbajo Tinubu in supremacy battle over APC governors.
Supremacy battle.
Well, you said it. It's what editors do. As Tinubu meets 17 governors publicly after Osinbajo's secret meeting. The APC governors not under pressure, subscribe to Bagudu, says party may adopt consensus. It's like the only way the APC has ever gone so. And then there's that one you mentioned earlier, Kade. 2023, many injured. 2023, many injured as MC Oluomo loyalists NURTW clash in Lagos. Is there a connect to 2023?
No, definitely. It has political undertone. Now, when you mention Oluomo, you know what we are talking about. You can't divert politics from what is currently happening.
Oui.
And that is why you see some people going away with certain things. You know, whether we like it or not, there are some untouchables. Okay, because people use them for their personal
Are you
interest.
saying this fellow is untouchable?
I'm not saying so. I said there are some untouchables. He may be there, he may be one of them, he may not, but you don't need rocket science to know that when Nigerian politics is concerned, there are those who are preserved to do certain dirty jobs.
What has politics got to do with road transport union? Road transport.
Everything has to do with it as far as politics is concerned. You know, these are the people they use to win elections. Don't forget. You know, why you and I will sit at home on election day watching analysis on Channels TV. These are the people that will actually go out, you know, to ensure that they vote and to ensure that maybe votes don't count.
Well, the good thing
and
is
things
that
like that, you know. So
people can actually, be on the go and watch Channels TV on their mobile. So that's not an excuse not to vote. You can watch on your mobile, your phone, your tablet, and all of that. So hey, go ahead and vote and still watch the analysis. Well, the New Telegraph is not untouchable this morning. I am touching it and looking at the front page. And this is what you find. Tinubu Osinbajo presidential tussle. 3 Southwest governors in dilemma. Yoruba elders may intervene. So this is a 3-page read, actually, pages 2, 4, and 30. And you have a host of riders right there. Of course, the ASU story makes its way to the front page. We're not opposed to renegotiation, FG. And let me just mention this one. Smuggled arms. FG should query customs immigration. That's, I guess, another angle to that CAN IDF, that meeting yesterday. One, insecurity, biggest threat to 2023 elections. Say new electoral acts won't guarantee free, fair polls. That's a New Telegraph for you.
And that's a look at the papers this morning. We're back after now to take on the issues for the day. Please stay with us.
Let's talk power this morning, the all-important topic of power, generation, distribution, supply, as a transmission now, all of the value chain. Over the weekend, we got news that we witnessed yet another grid collapse, and that was the third time in just less than a month or thereabouts. In fact, the previous time we had in successive days grid collapse, and this is not something, I mean, it just made a bad situation worse, as it were. A lot of Nigerians don't have adequate power supply in the first place. So with the grid collapse, it just makes it worse. But we're trying to find out what exactly is responsible for this. We've been on this journey for decades. And this morning, perhaps we can find out where the challenges are and point those in authority the right direction so we can resolve this. And joining us to do just that, we are joined right here in our Lagos studio by engineer Arthur Usiagu, who is a chartered electrical engineer. He's a member Nigerian Society of Engineers. He's also CEO CCS Technology Limited. Good morning, Engineer Usiagu.
Good morning.
And joining us from our Abuja studio is Professor Frank Okafor, who's a professor of electric power and control engineering, University of Lagos, and former Commissioner, Engineering and Performance Monitoring, Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, that's NERC. And right next to him is Comrade Joe Ajero, who is the General Secretary, National Union of Electricity Employees, NUI, and Deputy President, NLC. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the program as well. I'd like to begin from Professor Okafor. You know, reading out the designations and experiences of our panel on the program this morning, it hit me that, wait a minute, we have such, you know, brilliant minds, experts, and so much in the power sector in Nigeria, but we're where we are today in spite of all of that. So, I don't know, is there a simple explanation as to why we have, you know, so much resources in terms of human capital? I mean, we've thrown in a lot of funds into it as well, but we're still where we are with epileptic power supply in the country.
Well, thank you so much. Really impressed by the fact that this issue came up. The power sector had seen a lot of setbacks due to the way, I would say, things are really planned. When you look at it, from 1992, we have had about 3,500, 4,000 megawatts of grid supply. And this is 2022. We are still having 3,500 and about 4,000 of grid supply. I think that we should simply do things probably in a reviewed form. If you want to look at it, you know, seriously speaking, the nation is large, you know, and the grid power is low. I will tell you that the non-grid power is probably more than the grid power as we speak today in Nigeria. And therefore, I have personally looked at it, and I think that first and foremost, the grid is very weak. Very, very weak in the sense that the amount of power that is supplied by the grid is low. So we have to strengthen the grid by increasing the power that goes to the grid. It's a little bit complex. There's also the issue of control. 2 weeks ago, that's on the 14th, 250 megawatts just left the grid suddenly by some relay certain issues around the data line. And the grid collapsed, 250 megawatts. The next day, 300 megawatts had left in Shiroro, and the grid collapsed. You know, in last year, that couldn't have collapsed the grid. You know, so we really have to take a second look at the issue of the strength of the grid and start the corrections from there. There is more to say, but let me give others a chance to make their own contribution.
Thank you very much, Prof. So you say weak grid and control issues. And I'll ask the same question of Comrade Ajero, who's, vast in this sector before I come to Lagos. Same question I put to Prof. We have vast human resources, brilliant minds. We have laws, by the way, which we have tweaked from time to time. We have thrown in a lot of money. There's been a lot of conversations like this. But why are we still where we are? Is there a simple explanation for that for you?
Well, thank you very much. The issue has to do with management. You know, the human resource is there, and then the issue of management comes to play. You know, it takes a good manager to transform human and material resources to a great success. Like Professor Kafor cited, we have been hovering around 4,000 megawatts for almost 2-3 decades. It doesn't show that there is planning. It doesn't show that, you know, we have taken this matter serious. To such an extent that we failed to realize that during dry season, that the water level will go down, that the hydro stations will not operate optimally. And at this point in time, we continue to experience this year in, year out. We tinkered with the privatization process. And the privatization process now gave ownership of the generating companies to certain individuals who are supposed to, service their stations, make room, for maybe putting off their stations and the ones that are supposed to come on board. And there should be a coordinator who should coordinate it. If we are putting off Shiroro power station, we make sure that we come in, bring in a weak power station, to maintain the grid. Like he said, the grid is so weak. You can't have such a wide grid system, and then you are pushing in 3,000 megawatts, 2,000 megawatts. It doesn't work that way. And it has nothing to do with the people, the brains we have, because they can only transmit, what is available to them. And we keep on saying, we can generate 11,000 megawatts. Meanwhile, shortage of megawatts is what is leading to this grid. And the second factor is that we can't even police the lines, like the one that just happened a few days ago, around Port Harcourt region. You see people vandalize a line, you lost 400 megawatts, and it leads to grid collapse. So if we can't even protect ourselves, if the security situation in the country is such that, we can't even take care of, transmission or lines or generation lines, then we'll continue to experience this. So it's a mixed bag, on what is happening in Nigeria. We can't continue to revolve around 4,000 megawatts. It's not sustainable. It's not possible. So how do we go beyond that? It is clear that those people that they sold this
Comrade Ajero, we'll come to those issues in a moment. We'll come to those issues in a moment. I mean, we'll come to that, the collapse of the Odopani Korekbene transmission line and all of that. But let me get Mr. Arthur's Osiago's opening comments on this one. So we've had the academia point of view. He's also given us a regulatory, with his experience in the regulatory, yeah. Comrade Ajero has given us an inside view of these issues. For you, a nation of 200 million people, we're still grappling of managing 4,000 megawatts, 3,000, 4,000. What do you think is responsible? Any simple explanation for you?
Thank you, Kaudi. I think for the past 16 years, we've been in this same trajectory. And it's very clear that what we are currently doing cannot take us out of the woods. Now, in 2006, the Electricity Reform Act, came upstream. We were quite happy that we are going to get out of all the problems bedeviling the Nigerian electricity sector. But unfortunately, because we kept doing the same thing and expecting different results, we are where we are. Currently, there's no saying that the grid is actually weak. We are a country of over 200 million people. And if you look at Nigeria, it's really a very big country, over 900,000 square kilometers. And you are running a monogrid system. It's very simple. You generate electricity from maybe Papalanto here. You power the grid, and you transmit this grid on a network. I mean, transmit this power through the grid to a very large network. With all the turbulence, with all the trouble, you don't expect a country as big as Nigeria to be running a monogrid system. So the greatest problem we're having is the fact that a country as big as Nigeria is running a monogrid system. It's not sustainable.
Monogrid?
Monogrid means that you have only one grid taking charge of the entire nation. For example, from Lagos to Maiduguri, we are talking about over 1,400 to 1,500 kilometers. How do you monitor? How do you sustain this colossal network of grid system? A simple way is to break this monogrid into its various constituents.
Unbundle the TCN.
Unbundle, for example,
is that what you mean?
Yes. Why can't Lagos, that is consuming 50% of electricity in Nigeria, why can't Lagos have its own microgrid system? Why can't Kano have its own microgrid system? And you replicate the same thing. And you provide all the necessary energy mix. This problem of grid collapse will be a thing of the past.
But one of the arguments that's kind of stood against that was the law. I think it's part of the reason that the constitutional review is also ongoing now. Do you think that will significantly address that part?
Absolutely. You see, we started the reform, from a very, very good position, but we left out some essential aspect of it. Why should this country be holding TCN to its chest? It's totally it's not sustainable anymore. And it's very clear it can't work.
Okay. Prof, some data, some investigation carried out, over the years says that between, I think, 2013 and 2020, we had about 130 grid collapses, some partial, some total collapse, and you have referenced a good number of them as well. And this has been a concern for many, many years. But it's not the way we started. And most would expect that we should anticipate population growth, we should anticipate urbanization. At what point did we stop doing the needful in this nation that led us to where we are today? Because we've been battling this, as my colleague said, for decades.
Thank you so much. I wouldn't dwell so much into the history. The reason is that we are more concerned with what will change the situation and not what has really happened. I will tell you that in 1992, for instance, there was no grid collapse. Simply because some people, then Engineer Shombolu, now late, managed the grid properly. And there was a SCADA system that worked. They could see what they were managing and all that. Like I said before, let me come down a bit so that you don't call me an academic again. The issue of islanding. Somebody was talking about microgrid. We have to understand one fact. Grids are not meant to have the same structure all the places. I think we need to look at the way we are controlling our grid. Let there be a situation where area controls will be more effective. That is to say, there's the power being supplied. Then an area would just take the power, pay for it. When there's a fault, it can happen that it breaks off. There will be no collapse on their own part. And indeed, like the other gentleman said, there will be no grid collapse. But there could be area issues, and those areas are control structures that can manage themselves and can go into what is called islanding. That's to say, if there's a problem with the entire grid, they break into islands. If you look at India, for instance, there are plants that just serve a particular area. They don't go to serve the whole grid, only when there's a fault and you need them. So I remember telling the former managing director of MBET that she doesn't have enough power, but she has very expensive power. That is just the problem. We need to allow more power to come into the grid and decide on the terms so that it is not so expensive. In 2019, for instance, due to agreements signed, 109 billion was paid for power not delivered, trying to maintain agreements, which is unnecessary. If we try to get the brilliant group you talked about to look at these issues and government listings, we can get the grid to function such that collapses will be a thing of the past, and the grid power will increase. Of course, because somebody can be supplying the grid and also supplying the local consumers if need arises. And there could be islanding when a fault comes. If you look at the last 3 faults, they are avoidable. But it's not to do with TCN. TCN is only, like Ajero said, TCN is doing what they can and cannot do beyond that until the issues are addressed holistically.
Speak also to a concern a number of people have raised about over-centralization. I think that's what Mr. Swaglu here is trying to refer to. Over-centralization of the power of the electricity power infrastructure in the country. You don't want to go to the past, but if we don't know where we are coming from, you elders tell us we don't know where we are going. And you also talked about the fact that infrastructure is weak. So I don't know if there is a nexus between those two issues of over-centralization and weakness of the infrastructure that we have.
What we call weakness here is that there is one parameter that measures the amount of power you need to change the frequency by 1 hertz. If, for instance, you have 3,000 megawatts and you divide by 50, what do you get? So it means that when the power changes by 60 megawatts, the frequency changes by 1 megawatt. So it's a very weak grid. In a section of the US, if the power changes by 2,000, nothing changes. The thing, the system just does a little shaking and it's fine. So that is what this issue of better control will tend to address, such that the over-centralization will be, that word will really not be the word. The word will be that there's a grid, all right, but there's enough sectionalization such that there won't be at least a total collapse. If there's a problem in one area, the other areas can just break off the area that has problems and continue to do their service. That is one part of it. Then you talked about what has happened before. If you look at from that 1992, I said there was no collapse. Then there was no new power plant up to about 2000. And power plants are machines that keep deteriorating. And you must make sure that they are sound in terms of functionality. And that's part of our problem of weak infrastructure, apart from the weakness of the I would say, the theoretical part. But there's also the infrastructure that changes. I won't want to go into, I just know that we have a very short time. That's why, otherwise, there were issues even 2 years ago I had to raise, about trying to balance the functionalities of the machines, and not really based on who owns it, but how it functions.
Okay,
we need
so
to also address that.
That's a major point, and I'm glad you broke it down, so you wouldn't say I'm accusing you of being an academic yet again. But let me take this to Comrade now, and it's been postulated, or it's been suggested, that there needs to be an unbundling of the TCN. I know Prof is speaking to the fact that, well, maybe not a change of administration, but a change of the mode of, administering, the transmission sector of the power sector, in just the transmission subsector, rather. But let's be honest, if we keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, I mean, some will say that's not wise. So don't you think that lends credence to those saying, well, let's find another way to manage the TCN. Let's unbundle it. This monogrid system, as Engineer Osuago has talked about, is not working for us. Just a little hiccup and everybody has to pay for it. So don't you think that gives credence to those saying, let's find another way to manage the TCN, for example, unbundling it?
Well, you can take it equally from what he said. Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. In 2005, we unbundled the power sector, from one NEPA to one PSCN. And then we got 18 companies, and then the product is what we're having now. If you equally move further to unbundle the 18 successor companies to 50 or 60 companies, you still get the same result. Around 4,000 megawatts. If we are talking of over-centralization of what? Over-centralization of what is not available. Yeah, and then, even one section, like you mentioned, Lagos, can take what is, what we have now. And then we are talking over centralization. And people who are, market people, who are talking of the market, wants to talk about unbundle, give to A or B, the issue of management, the unbundling of the power plants, the unbundling of the discos have not produced any efficiency. It has not produced anything. In as much as, I'm not averse to when you say, unbundle a transmission section state. What is the aim that we're going to get from it? Is it when we generate, it goes to one place, or it comes to, or should it go to NCC or Shobo for them now to, allocate? Maybe Lagos needs this needs this. I'm not against unbundling it, but somebody agitating for unbundling of what we have today, should equally tell us what we're going to end, because the experience we have with unbundling in a sector has not produced any report. What it has produced is, in fact, increase in expenditure level. You now have 18 MDs, 18 general managers, all of them around 4,000 megawatts. Now, go further into the unbundling of, the TCN, we'll still be revolving on the same 4,000 megawatts. Let us address the issue of, insufficiency of the power itself. If you have 7,000 megawatts now, are we going to still experience the grid collapse the way we are experiencing it? The answer is no. I think.
Okay, Comrade, if you can break this down for us. Why do we have insufficient power? And I'd like you to break it down, really. Let Nigerians understand. Because, we can't take the power sector in isolation and say the discos are not distributing well enough. Don't forget, of course you know well enough that it's a value chain. So help Nigerians understand first, how much power do we generate? Okay, how much is then taken by the TCN to the discos? If you can give figures, how much do we generate? How much does the TCN take off the generating companies, across the grid? Then how much gets to the distribution companies for onward distribution to the consumers?
Okay, let's take it this way. Currently, we're hovering around 4,000 megawatts because it's not the same thing every day.
Is that generation or transmission?
Now, the 4,000 megawatts, we have.
Comrade, pardon me, the 4,000, is it what we're generating or what is taken off to transmit to the discos?
What is given to the transmission?
Oh, from the Gencos, it's 4,000 megawatts.
Yes, that's what they are bringing, you know. And then from the transmission to even the discos, you know, there are equally challenges because some discos will equally not pick loads. You know, even the 4,000 we are generating, some discos will tell you that if you say take 200 megawatts, they will say no.
Okay.
They'll give you
the transmission parts, comrade. Is the TCN able to take up that 4,000 megawatts, which you say is being generated by the Gencos?
TCN is ready to take 5,000, 5,500, 6,000 today.
Is it able to take it? All of that?
Yes, that's not where our problem. But I'm saying that even from the 4,000, you know, the discos as at today, when you say, oh, take 200 megawatts, take 300 megawatts, they still reject load. You know, so that's the major problem we have. You know, it is only when you now move beyond that 5,000 or 6,000 capacity of transmission, then that will now, you know, heap the blame on them. But if you have not given them enough, you know, to transmit, they can still be hiding. Their inefficiency will equally be hidden, you know, until you give them enough power to transmit.
Okay, that's quite interesting because the Gencos will tell you they're even able to give as much as they can, but they get, you know, this directive to shut down or step down how much they generate. But you said discos reject. Why do discos reject?
Their installed capacity. The Gencos talk of their installed capacity, you know, not actually what they can give. If it is actually what they can give, we won't be having this problem, you know, of a grid collapse here and there. If you lose 200 megawatts from somewhere, you suffer from grid collapse. They are talking of installed capacity, and that was the power purchase agreement, you know, that was made reference to before. You know, if you are paying them based on installed capacity, they'll be telling you that, you know, I can generate 600 megawatts. But in actual fact, what are they bringing to the grid?
But, you know, the Gencos, just before I come to the engineer in our studio, the Gencos have said they are told to shut down from time to time, saying, you know what, don't do beyond this because we don't have the capacity, that's from the TCN, to take up all of that. Can you confirm that?
Well, I've not heard that as of today, you know, but if that's the situation that the TCN can take more than 5,000 megawatts, then we'll take the blame to them.
Okay, let's come to Engineer Swagu. So this controversy about what is generated, what the TCN can take, and what is being willed to the discos, where do you think the challenge is?
It's a massive chain. It's a massive chain that is having laws of dislocation. And the simple reason is very clear. I've said it so many times that we'll continue to hover around these troubled waters until we do the right thing. And the right thing, as I said, I've advocated for this severally. But I know that those in the labor subsector will say, what is this engineer talking about? You see, you can't take a goat to the market, sell the goat, and you refuse to, you know, release the rope. Government must try as much as possible to take their hands off electricity subsector. That is the major issue. If they don't do that, we'll continue to hover around this trajectory for the next 10 years.
I'm sorry.
For the past 16 years,
but on that,
we've been talking about this. It's a recurrent decimal every day. Now, look at it critically. We had this same issue with NITEL so many years back. And government pumped so much money, entirely some of these funds disappeared. The same way government is pumping money in all the subsector. The Gencos we are talking about, yes, they've done complete, you know, government has sold most of them. The TCN is still being held by government. How about the discos?
And there's embed in that mix, by the way.
40% of ownership is also being held by government. Now you have a wholly, you know, separate body that generates electricity. You set up embed again, the bulk trader, that will sit in between and pay the Gencos on behalf of the discos, do you think the discos will not be lazy? They'll be lazy because MBET is sitting there. So whether they sell or not, government is there. The Prof talked about spending over 100 billion, paying to keep contractual agreements. These are wrong. See, government should take its hands off completely. And you begin to see rejuvenation of the power sector. People have clamored that, government cannot do that. See, the problem is that the government is still looking at electricity as a kind of a social, work thing.
Isn't it?
No.
Okay, well,
No.
Mr. Osiagu, when you said the other time that, and you've said it over and over again, and this is not the first time you are saying it, by the way, that government should completely hands off
The goats, by the way.
the entire, spectrum. So there is GENCOs that, as you said, fully deregulated, private sector driven, transmission companies, fully government owned. But you also heard Mr. Ajero say, we don't have a problem with the transmission segment. Where we are having a challenge is the discos. We'll talk more about that when we return from this break. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Well, Mr. Siago, that conversation you talked about government handing off, it's understandable. Everyone has talked about that. And when we talk about deregulation, we are quick to always cite the telecom sector. But then there are those in your industry who say that the telecom sector is completely different from the electricity sector. So we are talking about this now that you said that government should completely hands off. But government is in full control of TCN, and according to Mr. Ajero, who works in this sector, the transmission companies are good to go. Where we are having a major challenge as far as he's concerned for what he's saying is the discos who refuse load sometimes.
That's not completely true, Ayo. Take your mind back. You will know in the last 7 years, there has been continuous effort to increase the grid capacity. After 7 years, the grid capacity has not gone more than 5,000 megawatts.
When you say grid, which one? Is it the GENCO? Because average Nigerian there is hearing grid and is wondering
which one? Talking about the transmission.
That's the transmission,
yes.
All right.
Now, and so much money has been put into this aspect of making the grid, work. We have installed capacity, all the generating stations in this country, in excess of 12,000 megawatts. Now, if you have 9,000 megawatts today generated, can the grid wheel that capacity? The answer is no. It cannot. The grid cannot wheel it. So there's a fundamental problem. When the Prof talked about the weakness of the grid, these are some of the things we are talking about. The grid cannot wheel it. And you also heard that some GENCOs are being asked to switch off. You see, the issue is that if the GENCO generates and the discos and the grid, capacity cannot take them, government will have to pay.
Now,
because there's already an agreement.
Can you kindly slow down and let me understand what you're talking about? Okay. Because I'm at a loss. This grid is squarely transmission grid. The collapse is just transmission grid, not generation grid. When you generate, you feed into the transmission system. Yeah. Then the transmission system all over the country makes up the grid. Okay. Put it in a layman's language. But if you have enough capacity in terms of generation, and you don't have the capacity to wheel this generated power to the discos, then there's a problem. You've not done anything. Okay. Mr. Ajero, would you kindly very quickly respond to that one? Because you said the other time that we don't have a problem with transmission. Where we have a challenge is in the area of distribution, because the GENCOs sometimes they reject, the discos they reject the load. Can you respond to some of the things that you heard Mr. Osiagu say here?
Well, I had him clearly. It's worrisome, the analysis he is giving, because if the GENCOs are generating enough power the transmission capacity as at today, and this is verifiable, can take up to 7,000 megawatts. But he's talking about 9,000 megawatts. The transmission capacity is made for what we are doing now. If it can take 7,000 megawatts when we are generating 4,000 megawatts, I don't understand what he means by, by the transmission capacity not being able to carry the challenge. Of course, there are contracts, to increase it to up to 15,000 megawatts that are ongoing in anticipation, that the generating capacity will increase. But I'm even saying that even from the 4,000, that is willed, at the point of taking it to the end users through the discos, that some discos are still rejecting load. That's the point I have made here, and it's clear. And I didn't understand the reference, he made to NITEL and all that. As far as I'm concerned, that is not relevant in what we are discussing now. What we are discussing is that clearly we are on 4,000 megawatts. And that is what is coming from, the generating stations. To even at times we see to 3,000 something megawatts. And the transmission capacity will sit. That even with the 3,000 something, I repeat, either based on weak, distribution points or whatever, those ones will tell you, no, I will not take 200 megawatts, I will take 100 in that order. And that's the situation we have as at today, and these are verifiable facts.
Let me take this to Prof. Prof, I know you want to comment on this. So the question of whether or not we generate enough, whether or not the transmission company can take enough, or is it the discos? Where exactly is the issue? I mean, you have that view from the regulatory body, at least from your time there.
Yes. In exactly 1st of March, 2021, the TCN willed 5,800 megawatts, and that much was taken by the discos at the peak period. Peak period usually is between 6 p.m. to 9, 10 p.m. What happens in the case of this argument is that usually when the generating company generates, a part of TCN is the control, which is called the dispatch unit. The dispatch unit takes this power from the GENCOs and now will it, as it were, the transmission part will see to the discos. Remember that electric power is determined by the demand. The supply is determined by the demand. If there's no demand, no power is taken, whether it is available or not. There are usually two parts which I want you to please understand. Between this 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., we have what we call a peak period in the day. Most of the time in Nigeria is purely residential load, most of the time. So that's why the peak period occurs when I'm talking about when people have come back to work. So at that time, most of the time, the entire generation is taken. But other times, you find out that a lot of the power available for generation is not taken, not because TCN doesn't have the capacity, but because there's no demand for it. And that is where we are. I will also quickly add that the problem we are talking about, transmission, cannot be solved by unbundling of TCN. TCN is good the way it is, but it's simply, like I said, a little change in the management of the grid, in structuring of the management, not unbundling, definitely, because having several companies does not change anything. This area control I'm talking about will still be owned by the same TCN. It doesn't change anything. It's just that you sectionalize the network and each of them takes power from the grid, but can break off as an island if there's a fault. That's just the thing. It's something to change and make things better. But as we speak today, the problem is definitely not TCN. The problem as at today, and this great thing, is generation and consumption. You know, the discourse, I will let you know this also from the regulatory experience. The discourse are supposed to take minimum quantum of power in a day. And they try to optimize in quotes. What really they optimize is, if I take this minimum, how can I make the best money out of it? So most of the time, power, you are in darkness, not because there's no available power. It's just because the disco feels that giving you power will not give the disco enough money. That's just, so we need to address the issue of
Prof,
disco collecting enough.
Prof, a lot of issues, really. I'll try to see if I can touch on them. But this last one, you said that discos won't give you because, they can't make as much money. I don't know if I got that right. But don't you make more money if you give power? I mean, people consume more and they earn more money. I don't know. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yes. The issue is, remember, the cost of power is, I would say, segregated. You might be paying 52 naira, for instance, per kilowatt hour. There is the band D and band E. Band E pays about 37, and band D pays about 39 or so. So most of the time, the disco will prefer to sell this power to the higher bands. The industrial man pays about 62 or 63. So depending on where you belong, it's the same power they are selling, remember. So they want to sell it at the highest price most of the time. That's the optimization I'm talking about. But if we develop avenues where the discos can collect enough, in quotes, then you can see that more power will be taken and more generation. Once there's more demand, I'm sure building a power plant is not a serious matter. It's just because when you want to build and you think of the demand for it,
right?
You want to keep your money. That's just what happens.
So another point you made,
why
Prof.
we are still hovering at about 4,000.
Okay, Prof, another point you made, pardon me. I mean, I think it still makes sense to give more power because you earn more money. And I can even say that those within the high bands are not even getting as much power anyway, so you wonder to what point. But you also made the point about, the problem being with the generation and the distribution end, essentially absolving the transmission of any, do I say, blame in all of this. But, the generation will tell you they still have issues with gas supply. They have monies they are being owed. I remember some of them speaking very passionately about that. And of course, the shutdowns, which they are told to do from time to time so they don't, as it were, overcrowd the system. So how is the GENCO, or how are the GENCOs the problem in this one?
During the off-peak period, the GENCO generates power that is not taken by the discos. So the dispatch man, to make the grid stable, remember, if the demand is less than the supply, the frequency goes very high. If the supply is less than the demand, the frequency goes very low. In each case, the grid is disturbed. If you don't take time, it collapses. So the man who does the dispatch is like actually looking after a woman in labor. So each time he's in that trouble. So during the off-peak period, there's less demand. So if the dispatchman allows the GENCO not to shut down or not to come down from the amount it's generating, the frequency will go haywire. So that's why you see that issue of shutdown or no shutdown. It's simply because the demand has come so low that this power you are generating would rather collapse the system.
Well, Prof, I'm
That's
going to
the
be
reason
honest
for
with
the
you.
shutdown.
I'm going to be honest with you, Prof. Some of the points you made have been quite hard to understand, even for me, because I mean I'm not a player in that sector. But let me come to our Lagos studio and get Engineer Osiago's thoughts on this one. I don't want this to be like a back and forth, who's at fault. But let's pinpoint the problem. We'll still go over to Comrade and talk about the vandalism aspect of it. But hearing from Prof. About who exactly is dropping the ball here about the supply and demand. At some point, I was lost. I'm going to be honest, but essentially break it down for us further.
You see, Prof is just telling you exactly what the situation is. But bear in mind, we're only talking about 4,000 megawatts that is on the grid, and we're having this turbulence. This is a country as big as Nigeria that should be talking about 40,000, 50,000 megawatts of electricity. So many people in this country don't have power. And we're having issues with the meager 4,000 megawatts in the system. And we're having this turbulence. Prof is talking about the control aspect of it. So if the grid is strong enough, why are we having trouble?
You speak to what Prof said about demand and supply, that we don't have enough demand.
The demand,
what does that mean?
See, the demand is massive in this country.
Okay.
You and I know that so many households in Nigeria today, they are in darkness.
Okay.
Now, what is happening is that the discos, they are cash strapped. They don't have money, to actually expand their infrastructure. That's what. So what are they doing now? They buy power, and they want to give this power to what we call the high ends, those who can pay up to 60 naira and above per kilowatt hour. They call it willing buyer, willing seller. It's an acronym. Now, the masses of this country, who in terms of total quantum, they need this power, are not being served. Okay? Because the
who is supposed to be demanding the power that Prof says is not being demanded? Is it the discos that are not demanding the power from the gencos?
I mean, simple economics. When you have high demand, okay, so those who are supplying should work towards, increasing the demand. I mean, the supply, in order, to make more money. But what is happening now? The demand is there, but the capacity to reach out to this,
And that is why the discos are not demanding enough.
Exactly.
Okay, one very quick one from Mr. Ajiru, Comrade Ajiru, before we go. You heard the federal government say recently, two of his major officials talk about vandalism, as being responsible for the recent grid collapse. How did that come across to you? Is this something that we can get ahead of?
Well, I think the transmission network is something that we must guard seriously because it poses a lot of security challenge. Of course, this is not the first time it's happening. It's as old as the industry. We experience it from time to time. But I think that the federal government should increase, its surveillance, on these lines, to avoid, this constant grid collapse as a result of vandalism. There's nothing one can say beyond this, because if it is not, monitored, if there is no security on it, some of them are conditions beyond either TCN or even the players in the industry, because of the network. The network is wide. Somebody was telling you from Lagos to Maiduguri to Umuahia and whatever. So at any point in time, you wouldn't know what is happening in a particular place. So that is why there must be, surveillance if we must succeed, especially with the increased security challenges we're having in the country. I think this is important before we talk of what we are generating, because if what we are generating is being sabotaged, then it's going to be a complex problem for all of us.
You know, Comrade, I also find it rather curious that we've not been able to deliver on that supervisory control and data acquisition SCADA, which the ministry talked about. And this is essentially meant to secure the grid and all of that. But maybe we'll have this conversation in the coming days. But so far, I would like to thank you, Comrade Joe Ajero, who's the General Secretary, National Union of Electricity Employees and Deputy President of the Nigeria Labour Congress, joining us from our Abuja studio, as well as Professor Frank Okafor, who is a professor of Electric Power and Control Engineering, University of Lagos, also a former Commissioner, Engineering and Performance Monitoring at NERC. Thank you so much, Prof. And joining us in the studio, Engineer Arthur Osiago, who is a Chartered Electrical Engineer member, Nigeria Society of Engineers, and CEO, CCS Technology Limited. Thank you so much, Engineer, for your time.
Thank you for it.
Well, we'll go on a break now, and when we return, we'll talk about that very important conversation around money, revenue generation. It's a very, very difficult topic, but we'll take it on. So please stay with us.
This conversation will begin with two people, as you have seen in the welcoming slide. Kenneth Erikume is tax partner, tax reporting and strategy at PwC, joins us here in the studio. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
As well as Comrade Ambali Olatuji, who is National President, National Union of Local Government Employees, NOLGE. He joins us virtually from Delta State. Thank you for joining us this morning, Comrade.
My pleasure. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right. Well, let me begin with you, Mr. Erikume. So this has been on for a while. And of course, as you heard the president say, after so many decades, the federal government has decided to join forces with RMAFC to review the revenue sharing formula. First of all, do you see any value in it?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think clearly, for me, I think it's a quick win because to change things, you need to go to the root and change the structural setup of things. And that would take a lot of time. That would take constitutional reviews and would require a lot of effort before it begins to yield fruit. So I think the right thing to do would be to see where can we immediately get some quick wins. And I think that is what this is all about, where essentially with the call for more decentralization, you know, many stakeholders calling about fiscal decentralization. The government is now thinking, can we look at the revenue sharing formula to ensure that more is then given to the state and local government? One of the important outcomes from this process, which I consider to be very important, is the identification of the uncoupling or abrogation of the joint account between the states and the local councils. Because what that does is that, you know, with the clamor from the states always talk about decentralization, moving more of the resources from the center down to the states. But it's the same conversation at the local government level because, you know, for the funds to get down to the grassroots where the real value would be experienced, it therefore means there has to be additional allocation from the states to the local government.
Okay.
But when you have a situation where the accounts are controlled by the state government, it brings up a situation where the local councils sometimes are actually starved of funds to implement their projects.
Okay.
Just to give you some insights into, you know, why that's important.
Before we get that insight, I just wanted to ask a question around accountability. So there are those who are saying, okay, even the ones that the states have been getting, and which is part of which is supposed to go to the local governments, we haven't felt them. So there are questions around how that system ran and how this adjustment is going to make any significant difference. That's why I asked if there is any value in it, because so if on the one hand the states at their level have not been as accountable as expected, going by a recent report, audit report, you know, of how the states have not used their audit systems to show proof of accountability, then there arises questions that getting more might not even do us any, might not make much difference.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. But what I always say is the principle first, and then you deal with the other issues. So if the principle is not right in the first instance, you still need to address it, even if there are other surrounding issues that needs to be addressed as well. So in principle, you know, the central government, which is the federal government, has specific responsibilities and roles. So when we talk about fiscal federalism, you're looking at two important pillars. The first one is the instrument, which is the revenue generating mechanism. And then the second one is the functions. Now, when you look at how we have been structured as a country, a lot of power sits at the federal government, and a lot of the revenue generating mechanisms sit at the federal government. For example, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, the Nigerian Customs Service, and of course all the myriad of oil and gas infrastructure that government can get revenue from. However, you know, at the grassroots where, you know, and the president spoke about the importance of the revision and how it would impact on primary education, on how it would impact on primary healthcare, and security. Okay. You know, even those things, you know, the federal government plays a role, for example, in security. The way to really have an impact is actually at the local level.
Which is why
you need to have the allocation more to the local government and the state government. However,
operationalizing that is what we'll want to begin with.
Absolutely.
Comrade Olatunji, so the news is out, and of course the president has said, well, he's okay with it, but he wants to wait for the constitutional review process. First of all, when this news broke to you, how did you receive it? This is something that's been working, you know, I mean, work in progress for local government administrations. There are questions around how it is going to be operationalized, how it is going to be effected.
Thank you very much. Mr. President has stated the obvious. When you want to make an impact about governance, development, and all sorts, your concentration should be where people actually reside. And you know that by demographic survey, over 70% of Nigerians reside within the rural community setting. So if we are serious about giving dividends of democracy to the people, local governments must earn more. And in fact, our own proposal to that committee, we were proposing between 45% and 50% of the total revenue package of the country to local government. For example, if you look at the number of workers at the local government level, the number of roads available at local government level, the level of poverty at the local government level, infrastructural decay at local government level, threats to security at local government level, you will agree with me that even the proposed revenue sharing formula is not appropriate. Our belief is that direct effort should be made towards growing our local economy so that the local GDP will increase. And this will culminate into national GDP. So even the meager increment being proposed is not acceptable to us. And I also listened to my colleagues there talking about the principle. All of us know that the ongoing campaign towards local government autonomy, actualization of local government autonomy, has become a wildfire. It's so popular that everybody in Nigeria believes local government must be given financial autonomy and administrative autonomy. So in preparatory to that, we expect the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission to have recommended upward review to about 40% to local government. Because some of the ministries at the federal level, some of the ministries at the state level has no direct impact on the people. For example, Federal Ministry of Agriculture, they are doing little or nothing because the land belongs to local government. The rural farmers are in the local government. When you talk about primary health care, people really need that level of intervention are in the local government level. So for us, what the revenue allocation proposed is not even acceptable to us. We know that the level of the amount of money available at the federal level and the state level is too much, and the impact is not felt by Nigerian people. That is why we still have abject poverty standing at people in the rural area in their faces. And when you look at the level of decay in our primary education, you wonder. Look at the hospitals at the rural area. And let me also be categorical in this. When you are proposing larger amount of revenue to state government and federal government, you look at how many hospitals do we have at the state level, at the secondary healthcare facility. Whereas in all the cronies of the country, in all the local government, we have health posts, we have maternity centers, we have primary healthcare centers. And every local government will have minimum of about 50 health institutions. Whereas at the state level, the maximum they can have is maybe one per local government. That is the maximum. So for us, we believe that if we are serious in addressing poverty and developmental issues and good governance, the revenue allocation must be proposed in favor of the local government. We expect them to propose 40% to local government, not less than 1%. You can see that the recommendation is unfavorable to local government. You will see that if we give local government 40% allocation, we give state 25%. They don't need more than 25% for God's sake. And the federal government, maximum we can give federal government 15% or 20% is okay for federal government. Let us have money in our consolidated revenue, and the derivative formula to be given to those that are the areas that are deprived. That is how to go. That is the best way to go. We have 734
as it stands now,
in Nigeria. We have 136 states in Nigeria. You are proposing humongous amount of money to 36 group of people, whereby 774 and lower than that. And we have only one federal government. So
I'm quite curious.
Down the number of ministries at the federal level, let them be at the local government level. For example, Minister of Women Affairs, what are they doing at the federal level?
Well, Comrade Olatunji,
what are they doing at the
I mean, you have made a case for why local governments should get more. In fact, when last this was tweaked, it was about, over 20 years ago, we had 500 and something local governments. Now we have 774, and it will look like what you are getting extra is just an extra 1% compared to, the other tiers of government. Not even up to 1%, exactly, if you do the math properly. But let's go back a little bit, because I know the RMAFC tried to do like consultation, went around the country, consulting as to, how to go ahead with this. I don't know how long this lasted for, but I know it was quite some time. And I imagine that you put forward this proposal. What feedback did you get? And how do you think the government arrived at this? We'll talk about what the Constitution says, but what kind of, presentation did you make? How did that whole, conversation go?
You see, the way they did this time, we've been in local government service for a long time. The way they handled this time was an horrific thing. Enough consultation was not done. Because in the past, local government would have asked to submit their own proposal. The union there would have submitted their proposal. Even you, the media, would have been allowed to submit your proposal. All of us own Nigeria. But I bet you, even you are not given enough time to even contribute your own. Talkers of people like us. Though we moved from local government, we submitted our proposal. And the usual thing. By the time they will not call you to defend it properly. they will just talk to the papers and they will take their decision. That's not the best way to go. This issue of revenue is the life wire of this nation. And they should have allowed something like a referendum to be discussed about it, to be done throughout or before they come and they arrive at this decision. This decision is unfair to local government, it's not acceptable to local government, and it is anti-people. That's our belief.
Okay, so yes, we can always make a case for more, and of course give reasons for that. But let's talk about the, what is it, 20 point, what do local governments get now? 20.6% the local governments get now. In what
and this
way?
21.4.
Yeah, I mean, that's a proposal, but the current percentage is 20.6%. So let's talk about that one.
20.6.
Yes, so let's talk about that one. Just how efficient have local governments been in spending and giving account of that one? Because for a lot of people, they don't even feel local government, and that's the government that is meant to be closest to people. So when you talk about road construction, you know, when you talk about certain levels of maybe security, as it were, and all of that, a lot of people don't feel it. Infrastructure generally. So can you really account for even the 20% that local governments are receiving now?
You see, thank God that we don't just arrive here. In the 80s, in the 90s, you and I are in this country. When local government have direct access to their fund, when we don't have this set of state political actors that are all bent on destroying the local government system. I listened to the interview by the chairman of Governors Forum, who came on there and said there's no local government. And you can see that the way people are thinking is that local government, though some of them, though the feudal laws, few of them, are really out to destroy the system. What they did, the money you are asking us to account for, did the money really get to local government? This money has been siphoned using the instrumentality of law, using joint account allocation committee, which has become a conduit pipe. When local government is allocated 100 million, at times local government will not get up to 10 million in a month. This money are diverted at the state level through the joint account allocation committee. So you can't ask us to account for what does not even get to us. The federal government show good intention. They formed the NFIU. The president issued order paper 10, which was supposed to have cushioned the effect of all this diversion of local government funds. What did the governors do? They went to court to pursue it so that it is ineffective. And again, now you can see the struggle between the labor, organized labor, and the forum of governments. You realize that all of us know where the problem lies. It is those people who sit on local government fund, who spend local government fund, who prefer local government fund, that has caused this infrastructural decay, lack of meaningful growth and development at the local government level. And that is why you see all of them that are facing prosecution, investigation by anti-corruption agency have their problem situated in diversion of local government funds.
Okay.
So
we'll talk more. We'll talk more on that, Comrade Olatunji. You listen to him, Mr. Irukeme, and are you concerned?
I mean, I think as Nigerians, we're all concerned, right? We're all concerned with the issue of how revenue that has been generated is actually applied to infrastructure, into services, into public goods. And this is not just a local government issue. I think from the federal to the state to the local government, there's that question of, you know, our taxes, how far do they go? You know, one of the things that, you know, I think as a country we need to start looking at is more accountability on how funds are actually spent. And if I just pick the local government as an example, you know, the comrade is right that, you know, the allocation is actually small. But there is also IGR at the local government level. So the local governments have certain instruments or taxes and levies that they are able to collect, which is their own form of IGR. You know, and, you know, many questions have been asked about how are those funds actually applied to to Nigerian citizens and, the rural community and the local government.
Well, let's speak to some of those slides, and I know my colleague will do a little more on that one. But the sources of revenues for local governments, we have about 9, it's 9 subheads, and it's only one of them that is allocation. That's an external source of funding. We have development levy, tenement rate, penalties, ground rates, local license fees, and all of that. And those fines and the general licenses are for vehicle fees and all those things. And I have thoughts that, for instance, the vehicle fees, the motor park fees, right?
Oh, yeah. The Hackney permits, all of that.
I had thought that, all those funds that are collected at the parks, initially I thought they went straight to the local government, not knowing that some of them went to these unions and all of those things. Is there any way those could have been better managed?
Yes, so...
I'm talking about the collection now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there was a time I was working with a team and we looked at some of these taxes. One of the reasons why they are not effective is that there's a lot of proliferation of these taxes, the many of them. And, people cannot keep tabs on all of them. So one of the things that I think they need to do is to harmonize and bring all of them under, for example, at the state level, for example, we have the sanitation levies, we have the land use charge, which is a state tax, by the way, not a local government tax. We have other things around properties that the local governments collect. In other jurisdictions, you consolidate all of these things and you collect them maybe something like a council tax. And that will be effective because it's formal, everybody recognizes it, and it's collected at a central place.
By the state or the local government?
By the state or the local government, it depends. So some countries would use state government, some countries will use local government.
But in our case?
In our case, I would be comfortable with local government. But the problem is that the Constitution will not allow the local government to collect land use charge. So it therefore means that you can only consolidate what the local government can actually collect. The second thing is that you've got to remove the cash basis of collection, which is one of the ways that these things get out of the formal system into the informal system. Because a lot has been said about the informal sector and how is government able to mobilize revenue from this sector. A lot of these guys that play in the informal sector, they actually paying some form of taxes or levies of one form or the other. The problem is that many times it does not get into the government account. Like you mentioned, sometimes it's going to some association or some group, and therefore the local government does not see these funds.
Permit me to stay on that
Yes.
for a tiny bit of time.
Sure.
There is a report that was put out sometime in the middle of last year that in Lagos, the NURTW, for instance, in Lagos, generates something in the region of 123 billion naira annually. Now, they do not collect this at the state motor parks. They are at the various bus stops, in various local governments all over the place. So I'm wondering, is that something that could have been legislated against or legislated in such a way that it actually benefits the local governments directly?
Yeah, so I think Lagos State also tried to do something with that, actually. They tried to do something with the transport levy, where they levy an amount which will be collected as part of the dues. I think that's one of the innovations that the local governments need to look at. Unfortunately, because a lot of these motor parks are in different local governments, the infrastructure, the technology, and the mechanism to collect it becomes difficult for the local government. There's also the innovation. When I was in South Africa, for example, we had, similar to what we have in the local government in Nigeria, we have the TV license. It's a local government tax. But, I'm sure that, we have TVs in our house, but nobody comes to collect the taxes. In South Africa, before you purchase a television, you have to present the TV license. As long as you're buying it from a retail store or the mall or somewhere that is formal, you've got to present that, before you purchase. So you could actually have a system where the local government is cooperating with, maybe the state government, and looking for better mechanisms for collection of these taxes in a way that it doesn't, get siphoned and moves out of the system.
Right. Okay. We're winding down now. And, with the level of mistrust, as it were, between states and local governments, I mean, you heard Comrade Olatuji saying sometimes they get just 10% of the money they should get. Let me just wrap this up with Comrade. And we were looking earlier at sources of revenues for local governments, both internally and externally. Yes, we can talk about what's coming from the federation account, but internally, it will look like local governments have, the ability to collect so much from development levy, taxes on special services. They can collect rates as well, local license fees. I was looking at this academic work by Afe Babala University, where they chronicled all of these sources of revenue, earning from commercial undertakings, grants, donations, interest payment, dividend on investment, rent on local government property, and of course the external sources. So do we have an excuse for local governments to still be poor, as it were, in Nigeria when you have all of these avenues?
Thank you very much. That is an academic exercise. That is not the operational model in Nigeria. Let me tell you, the line use charges is illegal. Are you hearing me?
Yes, please go ahead.
The line use charges is illegal. What the law recognizes is tenement rate charges on those properties. But because of the intention to prevent local government from earning their revenue, that is why the state, hiding under Section 7(2) of the Constitution, that says the House of Assembly shall legislate upon local government functions, creation, and administration. That is what they hide under. For example, my colleagues there was talking about revenue collection at motor parks. Let me tell you, outlawing collection of revenue by union in the motor parks will be counterproductive. They are very able tools, very good tools to collect the revenue for local government. The union revenue is different from local government. In the past, they collect both. The local government will call them, they sit down together, they agree. And on every ticket by local government that is sold and their own union, they will collect their own union fee. They also collect the union local government motor park fee. And they remit it judiciously.
Well, the question then, Comrade, would be how this cooperation has worked so much in favor of the local governments, which is the question my colleague is asking. If they are getting so much, how come we're still talking about this? Okay, but
the government started showing interest in the union, the motor transport union,
we'll have to.
Them for interest.
We'll have to. We'll have to continue this conversation another time.
Yeah. They are not allowing local government to collect it.
Well, Comrade, we have to continue this conversation.
From the state government that comes to local government to collect the revenue. And even the ones they are supposed to remit to local government, which is 10% IDR, they are not remitting it. So there's no revenue available at local government level. The state government adjust the allocation, also adjust the internal generated revenue of the local government. That is what they are doing. That's why the local government is so poor. We have told them if they need this revenue to be collected by local government without undue interference by the state government, local government will be buoyant. They will be able to be accountable for it. And we are not even leaving local government with that. We even propose that there must be anti-corruption agency in all the local government to monitor how this public fund are administered. That is the clamor by Nogi.
We're waiting for how that evolves over time. Comrade Ambali Olatunji is National President of National Union of Local Government Employees, NOLGE, joined us virtually from Delta State. Thank you so much, Comrade, for being a part of this conversation, as well as Kenneth Erikume, who is a tax partner, tax reporting and strategy at PwC, joins us here in the studio. Thank you so much for being a part of our show this morning. Well, your own content on the program is next. I will begin with this one by Olagunju Oladele, who says the issue, talking about the first topic, is generally electrical generation and supply. We need to stop focusing on only centralization. It should be about splitting up the traditional system into many small sub-networks that could supply power when the connection to the generating plant fails.
Well, Chike IQ, as Dr. Chike Okogu says on electricity as well, let's address the elephant in the room. Power business is dollar run, and our currency devaluation killed all profits for Gencos and Discos. Gas is now expensive. Our current tariff is far less than 11 cents per kilowatt hour. There lies our entire value chain problem, he says.
Dr. Ikpemosa says, inability to design an adaptive governance structure for the power sector is the problem. The ineffective allocation of cash flow and control rights is a major source of tension crippling the sector.
And finally, from Fest_Akin, that's Festus Akimboyewa, says, no doubt that our only grid is thoroughly overwhelmed in a country that's blessed with coal, gas, petroleum, solar, and hydro, all in abundance. Nigerians should have no business with darkness if government can properly identify the obstacles in electricity generation and supply. Well, we have generated the content for you this morning. We have supplied you with some of the solutions.
As demanded.
As demanded, and we hope it will be distributed appropriately. And that's how we anchor today on the program. We'd like to thank you so much for your time and your contributions. I'm Kayode Okikioludo. Have a beautiful day ahead.
We have just one nation. Make a contribution to make it better today. I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.